Hello there, and welcome to the English Language Club and to our weekly live stream. I'm not sure if you can see us. I hope you can.
I think they can. Yeah.
Okay. I'm getting an error at my end, but it's okay. So great. Thank you for joining us. My name's Colin, and this is Tony. So we have a few questions to get started with, but who's with us? Tony, can you see who's with us? I can't see at the moment. Hopefully I'm gonna get my info.
Oh yeah. Well, so far Susanta has said hello. Always good to hear from Susanta. Great questions. Shaheen is here. Welcome. We had great questions from you last week. Looking forward to it. Jack is with us, one of our regulars, especially active on the Discord. Great. Yep. And also AJ is here. So welcome everyone. Go ahead and get your questions in for sure.
We got a couple of questions from Jack that he left on Discord during the week. So we're going to start with those, and hopefully we'll have some more questions from everyone else once we've done those. So first of all, then Jack says, "What is the difference between affected and affected?" Now, this is definitely, I could affect and effect with an A and an E. These are definitely words that get confused a lot. And I know that native speakers make this mistake very regularly. So what is the difference, and when should we use each one?
Yeah, so the simplest way to think of it is affect with an A is a verb. It's something that you do or something does. Like, that really affected me, right? It's a verb. It is causing something. An effect is where you cause something. Effect with an E is more of a noun. It's the result. Like, when something causes something, what is caused, that's the effect with an E, right? And these are really commonly confused. Sometimes it's really just a spelling thing. People just, don't know to spell it differently, but they are two different words. But also sometimes people think they know which one is which, and they get really confused about it. So generally, affect with an A is when something is causing something. Effect with an E is what was caused, like what the result was, right? Now, that said, there are also other meanings of the word affect and effect that mean different things. I don't think we want to go into those. So my advice for the word affected with an E, affected, is don't use that word. Most of the time, people are not going to understand what you mean, or at least they're going to think you mean the more common affected. So generally, I wouldn't recommend using affected with an E, using that word. It means something different, and I would avoid it. Jack is asking if affect with an A has a negative connotation, and not necessarily. Neither of them are necessarily negative. They're just talking about either what you're changing something, or what got changed, right? So you could say, I was really that really affected me, and you could talk about a beautiful piece of music or a song that made you, that impacted you very positively, right? But we can also talk about the effects with an E of a natural disaster and all of the negative things that come out of that. So neither of them are negative or positive. They're just talking about results or causes, which can be negative or positive.
Yeah, great. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because YouTube has logged me out.
Oh no!
Very annoying while I'm in the middle of a live stream. But
that is well. We can still see you and hear you, I believe.
And we are still going live, yeah.
It shows up on YouTube. I'm watching on YouTube, so. Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, so we're connecting through the live stream software, so that's hopefully okay. Great. Okay. Well, I hope that's answered the question, Jack. Let us know if that was helpful. And then your other question, or it's more of a comment. Have you seen Russell Brand speak? He skips all his T sounds. Yes, I have seen Russell Brand speak, and he does skip all of his T sounds. It's a very sort of London, or maybe even like a Essex accent. Essex is it's a region. it's a region. It's a what is it? It's a borough. It's a London. Yeah, it
Well,
sort of overlaps with London, but it's also to the sort of to the east. I think it's a sort of Essex accent.
Okay.
But he does skip all his T's. He has we've talked about this skipping the T's thing a lot in the past. If you want to hear an example of it, just Google Russell Brand, and you'll see. Okay, so have we got any questions in the chat now? Let's see.
We do. Yes. Did we miss one from Jack in the Discord?
From Discord? Those are the only two that I got. Oh, there was another one. Yes. What is an archetype or archetypal?
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was from earlier, and I just forgot it. An archetype is just the perfect example of something, right? So, for example, when you're reading a story or something, and there's a character that is, a damsel in distress kind of character, they're being rescued. That's the archetype, the damsel in distress, right? And so something can be an archetype, or it can be related to an archetype. We have all sorts of these things. They're just things that you kind of recognize, and you know what they're like. When you run into a farmer and they're grumpy and particular and old-fashioned, that's an archetype. It's just sort of a typical thing. They're sort of related to stereotypes, but stereotypes are usually considered negatively, and archetypes tend to be grander. I think you asked if archetypical and archetypal are the same. Technically, no, they're not. Archetypical means like that it's related to an archetype. So if you meet an old, grumpy, old-fashioned farmer, you say, oh, well, that's archetypical. Whereas archetypal is the adjective, like when you're discussing archetypes. You say, where we're having an archetypal conversation means you're talking about archetypes. So no, they're not technically the same, but generally speaking, no one ever uses the word archetypal. You most of the time mean archetypical. Yeah. Or archetypical. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
But we do have some questions in the chat already.
Yeah. Okay. So do we go with AJ's question about subjunctive?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So AJ says, what is a subjunctive? Great question. It's one of those sort of very technical grammar-y terms.
So again, I don't like to get into we don't like to get into too much detail about some of the technical things. So maybe we could go into more detail later on this. But subjunctive is one of the different kinds of ways of expressing, kind of hypothetical or possibility, as opposed to something for sure. And there's a lot of different ways. We talk about, the first, second, and third conditional, subjunctive versus conditional, this kind of stuff. We don't usually go into those details. But subjunctive is something like saying, well, if I were you, I would do something, right? Well, you're not me, right? Like I'm not you. So that we know that's not really there. So you're not talking about something that really exists. You're talking about a hypothetical or something that could exist, but that isn't. That doesn't.
So it sort of ties in with conditionals when we say, we say if I were you, and it sort of affects the way we use tense, because we sort of talk in the past tense, even though we're sort of talking about a hypothetical,
exactly,
or future even.
Lorena from Argentina, welcome, said it's like the unreal tense. And yes, that's excellent. A good way of thinking about it. It's not a tense, though, and that's something that's interesting. There are a lot of things that are closely related to tense, voice and mood, that are they work very similarly to tenses, especially in English, because in English, all of those things are made with auxiliary verbs.
Auxiliary verbs, yeah.
So yes, that is it's very similar to what it's like. It's really the unreal mood, but it's just like having a tense. Just if you think of passive voice as being almost like a tense, it's a modification to a tense. Subjunctive is the same. It's a modification to a tense that makes it unreal. There's levels of unreal. Something is just, like wishes. Like I wish I had $1 million, right? But we don't usually like to get into how can you tell the difference between the different levels of unreal?
Yeah,
It's just
that's too deep.
yeah.
Even the word subjunctive, I think, gets a little bit too technical. But I do love to talk about how we use that past tense. If I were you,
Yes.
or if I had, had is a past tense, but I'm talking about the present. But this unreal tense, as Lorena calls it. I love that name for it. I always just refer to it as a sort of alternate reality, but
alternate reality.
Really
Unreal tense is great. The other thing, AJ, is that subjunctive is going to mean different things depending on what discipline you're in. It means something different I learned it in the context of linguistics and interpreting, and it means something a little bit different there than it's used in English grammars. But I don't know that it's used consistently in English grammars. I haven't really looked at that. I suspect that it's not, because you hear about conditionals and sometimes you hear about subjunctive, and it's hard to know whether when you're talking about it, you might be using a different definition than somebody else. So it's one of those technical words that we usually try to avoid. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that, AJ. Hope that's helpful. So Akshay, hello, Akshay.
Oh, welcome back.
Good to see you again. Hello, sir. I find it hard to understand when native speakers speak fast and longer sentences. So how can people learn to cope with that?
Yeah, that is very tricky, and that it affects everyone, right? And it's not just like, for example, if you are, if a Scottish person with a thick accent or an Irish person with a thick accent is speaking slowly, I can understand them usually with no problem. There might be a word they use that is an uncommon word, or just isn't a word that would ever be used outside of those regional accents. But most of the time you can understand. But when they speak fast, suddenly it becomes impossible. Another example is Jamaican, though it's more than just the speed. Jamaican Creole or Pidgin, whichever you call it, but Jamaican English, if they're speaking quickly, they also tend to change some of the words they use, and it becomes impossible to understand for someone who just knows kind of a more common English. So some of this, this is just the way accent and regional dialects work, right?
Yeah.
So don't get too upset about it, because the same thing happens to native speakers when they're listening to an accent that's different enough from them. But I think there are some ways that you can try to
I think
work
it's
on
one of
this.
those things. There's not really an easy answer. There's not like a tip. It just comes down to practice and
yes. It's your brain. How fast you understand something has nothing to do with how good you are at it or how or whether you know it. It's just, has your brain had time to make all those connections? And that just takes time. It's just something that you have to be used to it enough that it begins to make sense for you. This is why I'm generally really against speed as a measure of someone's ability. Like, how fast can you do something? And the same is true as how fast can you understand a spoken language. It's not really a measure of how well you understand it. It's a measure of how long you've been doing it, right? Which is good. I mean, it's important to recognize, people who have spent a long time doing something. But it's not a good indicator of your ability or how much work you've put into it, just how much time. And not everyone has the same amount of time.
Saying that, you can practice that specifically. You can sort of listen or watch movies with subtitles. If you're listening and you don't understand it, and you can actually read what is being said, then that will help to understand it.
Yes,
right.
I agree. That said, there is one easy tip. Which is never be afraid to ask people to slow down. If you're in a one-on-one conversation, then it's almost never rude to ask someone, can you say that again more slowly, right? Obviously, if you're in a large group, you can't always do that. But if you're having a conversation with someone, then it's usually okay to ask them to slow down.
Yeah,
that's the easy tip, but it doesn't always. It's not always available.
Yeah, Lorena says Americans speak very fast.
Americans, yeah.
Americans, yeah.
It depends, though. That's a regional thing, and
yeah, I think some people speak faster than others. It's like accent, I guess. In a way, different people have different speeds of speaking.
And the same is true, for example, in Spanish. Like some regions, some areas, they speak Spanish much more slowly and maybe clearly, and it's easier for foreigners or people who are just learning to understand. Other places, they speak very quickly. Yeah, so it's
Lorena's added that she studies RP, which is the sort of British kind of a standard British accent, and that might be why she struggles more with Americans and thinks that they speak faster, is because it's not what she's less accustomed to, the American accent. So yeah, but yeah, it does just take practice, and I would recommend having situations where you can listen, but also listen to something that is challenging. It is, it is at that speed that is you can understand, but almost not understand, but be able to read it as well, like subtitles or an audiobook or something like that.
Yes, I agree. Audiobooks are especially good because you can adjust the speed. There's a term for this. I can't remember what it's called, but a really good way to improve your speed of listening is to listen to something played very slowly, and then listen to it again played fast. Not fast, but at normal speed, if you felt like it was too fast for you before. Listening to things ahead of time so you know what it says, but listening to it slowly, then listening to it again at normal speed. That's hard to do with movies, plus it's weird to watch. But it's easy to do with audiobooks or podcasts or things like that.
Yeah.
Most audio players will let you control the speed. Even YouTube will let you control the speed.
Well, podcasts, you may not get the subtitles as well.
That's true. I mean, it depends.
What would be an interesting experiment that we could do now is while you're watching, this is live, obviously, but there is the option, you should have the option to turn subtitles on, and it will do a sort of automatic transcription. So maybe if you could all do that now, or I don't
have that option.
You do not, don't you?
No.
Maybe it's not because it's live or something.
We'll try it. We'll look into it for next time. See if we can make sure that it works.
No, I know why. No, it won't work because of one of the settings we have. Next time we'll change the setting. Yeah, because there's that delay. To minimize that delay, we set it to the ultra low latency, which means we can't do subtitles. Next time,
maybe next week we'll try.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. So Shaheen has a question. Shaheen says, here we are. He's getting home tonight. Here, home is an adverb or a noun?
That's
home.
That's a really interesting question, Shaheen. This gets back into what we were talking about, a couple months ago about the verb get. Here, getting means arriving, right? He is arriving home. So home here is a shortcut of a prepositional phrase, like getting to home, or he is arriving at home. So it's not, I mean, it's being used adverbally, but it's not an adverb, I wouldn't say.
No.
Coming home is sort of, I mean, it's sort of like a phrasal verb, but not really. So I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't know technically. I kind of doubt that home is an adverb.
I think both these words, getting or get and home, both kind of bend the rules about what kind of word they are, because get is technically a verb, but it's not really. It doesn't really mean anything. We've talked about this in the past, how and also home as well. It's not necessarily a physical place. It's not. It can be your house where you live, but it's also a feeling. I feel at home with you. So it's not necessarily a noun in that sense. So yeah, it's a really great question, and it's not really a straight answer, is there? The answer is that both these words are strange, and so yeah, thinking about the ways in which they're strange is really useful.
Yeah. I suspect that you might find home on a list of adverbs in some dictionaries or whatever, and it might not be there in others. But yeah, I think that's exactly the point. Sometimes understanding how things, not break the rules, but veer off the tracks a little bit is just as important as understanding when they do follow the ruls.
Yeah, or how they follow the rules. Yeah. Great. Okay, I hope that's helpful, Shaheen. Let us know if you want us to elaborate any more on that. But we've got another question from Shaheen, who says, do British overseas territories in North America also follow the North American English? So I'm not sure. What's a British overseas territory in America? Would it be like
the British Virgin Islands? I don't know. Like there's Commonwealth countries like the Bahamas. I always confuse which Caribbean countries are British overseas territories, but generally no. The Bahamas certainly have so many American tourists that there's there are some more American things that they say, but generally speaking, no. In the British Virgin Islands and Bahamas and places like that, even Jamaica, they speak with more of a British accent than North American accents. I mean, there's definitely some influences. All these regional accents, it's not just one of two categories, right?
Yeah.
There are regional accents in the US that sound more like a British accent than sound like typical Midwestern American accent, and the other way around. So it's not just firmly categories, but no, mostly the British places in the Caribbean speak more British English.
Yeah, and like with it's not a British overseas territory, but in Canada, there's certainly the Canadian accent and Canadian English is somewhere between American and British.
Pronunciation, it's usually along the lines of American, especially the big things, like the two things that we talk about, the and the R. Those pretty much follow American English. Though there are, again, some things that are different about the Canadian accent. But then in spelling, Canadian spelling follows British spelling. But that's an interesting example because Canada's pronunciation has gotten much closer to American over the years, whereas places like the Bahamas or Jamaica or the Virgin Islands haven't as much, for some obvious reasons, of course.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Canada, Jack asked, "Is French a second language in Canada?"
So that's a complicated question. Actually, is French a second language in Canada? Because the answer is both yes and no. French is a first language for most Canadians that speak French. In Quebec, parts of Ontario, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and just all over, there are first language native French speakers in Canada. So French is legally a first language in Canada. That said, the majority of Canadians, English is their first language, and many of them choose to learn French, in which case French is a second language for them. But you wouldn't normally say French is a second language in Canada. It's a primary language. But then for anyone who learns it that it wasn't their first language, then technically it's a second language.
Yeah. Great. Just looking through the rest of the comments, we don't really have any more questions as such. A few comments we can talk about. Carolina says, "Hi everyone. It's great to listen to your pieces of advice," and she also suggests that her students listen, which is great. Thank you very much, Carolina, and it's very nice to have you here. And Shaheen is talking about her previous question about the adverbs, and she said that she saw a YouTube video.
Home listed as an adverb. Yeah, I suspect it will be listed places as an adverb.
Because it depends on the context. It's like it's not that it isn't one or the other. It depends how you use it. So if you use it as an adverb, it's an adverb in that sentence. But if you use it, what else could it be? Could it be an adjective? No, homely would be the adjective. No, homely.
No. You could certainly say it's my my home phone number, right?
Yeah. Then it's an adjective. Yeah. And it's funny we say, "Are you home?" when that's not. We mean, "Are you at home?" But we're just dropping the at. You don't actually become home.
So this is the question: like, do you count? And this would depend on the linguist who's studying it, right? Do you count home as an abbreviation of at home? Therefore, it's just a shortened prepositional phrase, or is it a new use of the word home that we're going to call an adverb, right? And that's why, like, that's going to depend on who's deciding it. And there is no such official for English. So in order to know whether that's official, I'd have to look at a whole bunch of different dictionaries and see what they said, which we could do. But again, I think the important thing to understand about English is that almost any word can be used as almost any part of speech and to be understood. English is just incredibly flexible that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I've even seen exercises in books where they just make up a word, but then they use it as a verb, as a noun, as an adjective, just so you can
to show you can,
to show that you can tell from the words around it what type of word that is. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Great. So another question from Shaheen, but first a question from Win Sang, who says, how can we think in English? Now, this is something that's come up before, and I think to think in English is like one of those. It's one of the. I don't know. It's like when people are trying to sell a course or something, they say, we don't just teach you how to speak English, we teach you how to think English. And to me, it just seems a bit more like some, sales speak rather than something that you can actually teach. I mean, it is true that you do start to think in English, or I remember when learning Spanish, starting to think in Spanish, but it was just something that sort of started to happen when I got to a certain level, when I started using Spanish at a certain amount.
For sure.
What do you think? Do you think it's something you can specifically learn to do?
Well, yes, but it probably isn't a thing that is useful to specifically learn to do. So I want to say two things about it. First of all, thinking in English is not just by that going to make your English conversation better. As part of the whole process of learning more of your more vocabulary, understanding the grammar, making connections between words, really beginning to understand by intuition how sentences go together. Sure, that and your brain beginning to think of things in English instead of thinking of them in a different language and then kind of translating them. All of those together improve your ability to speak. But by itself, that's not a key step that's going to make a huge difference on its own. The second thing I want to point out is that is a stage that different people are going to get to at different levels. Some people might very quickly begin to create simple sentences in their head in a new language they're learning. Other people might not do that for years and be very, very fluent, but still mostly they're thinking in their own native language, right? And so I think it's very important not to push yourself or judge yourself or others because you're not thinking in English. You don't feel like, oh, I'm not thinking in English, so I'm doing something wrong, or oh, my friend says they speak in English and I can't. I'm not as good as they are. Anything like that. It's very individual because thinking is about your brain. Your brain just has to get used to it. Your brain takes time to learn these things. You can memorize things, but that doesn't mean that your brain has created all those connections. So just give yourself time. Be patient with yourself. I don't think it's something that is worth trying to do. It's like learning card tricks. Learning card tricks is cool. It's neat, but it's not going to actually change the way you play cards unless you're cheating. But anyway, so not to disparage that or not to say that's bad. Like card tricks are awesome. Colin happens to be very good at card tricks.
Well, I used to be. I haven't practiced for a long time, but
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. The physical parts, I'm sure you have to practice. But yeah, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you do want to practice it, what I would recommend is try repeating things to yourself in your head, because that's the closest thing you're going to get to help practice those pathways in your brain. Try to repeat things silently. This is something I do, partially because I hate talking to an empty room. But when I'm learning a language, I repeat things mentally instead of out loud. And that's not normally the best thing to do. You should repeat things out loud because you're getting your muscles and everything used to it. But if you really want to practice the thinking part, try repeating things just in your head silently. But I wouldn't worry about it.
There's another thing I remember. There's certain things that when I was living in South America, I used to say a lot, like my phone number, telling people my phone number, or we had these ID cards, and you had a number that you had to often tell people what your ID card number was. And I can still remember them in Spanish. I could say them in Spanish, but I couldn't. If you asked me to tell you what my phone number was in English, I'd have to really think, because
absolutely.
So in some ways, just because of the fact that I was using that particular phrase, or in this case, sequence of numbers in Spanish a lot, I would think it in Spanish because I wasn't used to thinking it in English.
For sure.
It does come down to just
how often you're using it.
Yeah, the frequency of what you're using something.
But again, remember that level is going to be different for everyone. Some people will very quickly begin to think in the other language. Some people, I don't know, maybe never. It's very individual, and it's not a better or worse thing. It's just how people do things differently.
Yeah, well, one of the things I learned from teaching English is that people's brains are wired in different ways, and some people will learn languages very, very quickly. Some people it's more difficult, or not. It's not that it's more difficult. It's they just learn languages slower, and that's fine. And so knowing, being aware of whether you what you're good at and what takes time, that's really important.
Yes.
So and don't be like don't think, oh, I'm not good at learning language. Just think, I learn languages in this way.
Differently, yeah.
We
give a lot of tips.
As fast as other people, or
Yes, we give a lot of tips and ideas, but it's important to realize not every tip is going to work for everyone the same way, right?
Yeah.
You got to try different things. Some people really benefit from learning a lot of grammar rules. That's probably not many people, but some people probably do. Exactly. So I do too. Like I like learning grammar rules. I like understanding how things fit together. That's one of the first things I learn when I learn a new language, which is weird. But that's not a tip I would normally recommend because most people would not benefit from that. And this kind of thing. So, and this is true also when you're watching other things. Like this kind of started out with Colin saying that, sometimes people use this to like lure you in, saying we can make you learn to think in English. Well, no, they can't. That's just something that's going to come to everyone differently. So always be aware of that when you hear tips and you try it and it doesn't work for you. Not everything is going to work for everyone. Everyone is different, right?
Yeah. Okay, let's move on because we've got a few more questions now.
It was a great question.
Yeah. Shaheen says, which languages are stress languages and which are tone languages? So, well, English is not a tone language. English is stressed. Every word has a stress, but are those two things mutually exclusive?
No, there can be stress in a tonal language. So they're just different things. As opposed to which ones, like, do you mean like what kinds of languages? Like Chinese is very famously, like either Mandarin or Cantonese are very famously tonal languages. I forget what Cantonese has more tones than Mandarin, things like that. English is a pretty non-tonal language. There are some words where kind of the way you say it does change the meaning of the word, but not usually. Usually it's the pronunciation of the sound. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. So it's also, this isn't just an on-off thing. Like some communities might speak more tonally in some accents, this kind of stuff. There are whole languages in the world that can be spoken completely without tone and understood, but they are tonal languages. And when spoken properly, they're spoken tonally, right? So it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But for sure,
and
in
I'm not
English,
an expert on other languages really, other than English. Even English, maybe not.
the biggest difference is that going from a tonal language to a non-tonal language like English is not usually that hard, but stress sometimes is very difficult. If you're coming from a language where stress is not as important, and stress can mean one of two things. It's either where you place the emphasis in a word or where you place the emphasis in a sentence. And both of those are very important in English. They're both very important in English. So this is about understanding the language you come from and the language you're trying to learn, so you can focus in on the things that are very different and that you know are going to cause you some trouble.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, but I feel like in English, the tone of an individual word doesn't make any difference, but tone does come into across a sentence.
Well, that's what's called, is that intonation, right? Yeah, across the whole
like
sentence.
when we ask a question, we often, come up a little bit at the end.
Yes. Mainly that's it. There are some words, I can't think of an example where the tone is a part of the word, the tone change. I think they're mostly loan words from other languages. But yes, the main thing with tone in English is intonation, which is how the tone changes across the sentence, right? Like raising your voice for a question or things like that. Also, obviously English conveys a lot of emotion with the tone, but it doesn't change the meaning of the words. It doesn't change the word from one word to another, which is what is the definition of a tonal language. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I hope
Thanks,
that's
Lorraine.
helpful.
Good questions.
Yeah, that was actually Shaheen's question.
That's right.
Lorena was just
had some comments. Shaheen, Lorena, good questions as well.
Yeah. Lorena also says, I watch all your videos with my students. They're great. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you and your students are finding them helpful. So let's see. A few more questions. We've got one from Mercedes and a few from Jack. We'll start with. We just work our way through the questions kind of chronologically. So we will get to your question, Mercedes. But first, we got one from Jack, who says, T.S. Eliot sounds British. He's an American poet, isn't he? I was in school. We had to learn his poem Railway Cat. I'm not an expert on T.S. Eliot, but I mean, when was he around? You wouldn't have heard him actually speaking, would you?
I'm sure there's recordings of him. He lived through World War II, so I'm sure there's recordings. There might even be TV broadcasts. I'm not sure. So T.S. Eliot was born in the U.S. but lived most of his life in the U.K. He maybe even gave up his U.S. citizenship. I'm not sure. So if you heard him in the a recording of him from like the 40s or 50s or I'm not sure when he died. I don't know. Maybe he had a British accent by then. I wouldn't be surprised. He lived the majority of his life in the UK. But he was born in like Missouri or someplace with a really strong accent. So if he had still that accent, it would be strong and noticeable. So I don't think he still did.
It's interesting. I've got a couple of friends who were both American, and they're brothers, and they were born in America, but then moved to the UK at quite an early age. But the older one was, I think, around 10 when he moved, and the younger one was about 7 when they moved. And just those 3 years made a big difference. Like, so the younger one developed a British accent, whereas the older one didn't so much. So, yeah, I think that the age that you move can make a
huge difference.
But then, having said that, I think somebody might move at 40 and develop a British or an American accent.
Well, especially if you move at 20 and then live there for like 60 years. Well, like, maybe at some point you will. He is often referred to as an American poet. Like, poets is not an area of study of mine. Like, I know who these poets are, but I don't like study them. So I don't know whether the people who classify poets have an opinion on T.S. Eliot being a British or an American poet, but he was born in the U.S. but lived almost his entire life in the U.K. Though I'm pretty sure he moved as an adult, but I might be wrong. But yeah, I've never heard him speak that I remember. So I don't know what his accent was like.
Okay. Great. Well, I hope that's helpful, Jack. So next question is from Mercedes, who has a question about pronunciation. Oops, sorry.
Yes. Aspiration.
How can we improve the aspiration of t and p sounds? So specifically aspiration, that means that you're breathing out to make a sound, but also that you will actually feel the air, because you're breathing out when you say any sound almost.
But you're like pushing the air out through a small gap. It's like the difference between breathing and whistling, right? When you're at aspiration, you're kind of pushing. As opposed to just, because when you say a d is also, you're breathing out when you say a d sound, but you don't force the air out. Where when you say a t, you force the air out.
Yeah, and if you hold your hand in front of your mouth when you say the sounds, you'll be able to feel it. In fact, if I hold a little piece of paper, I'll just rip this off. You'll be able to.
The aspiration test.
So that's how you know you're aspirating a sound. So yeah, certain sounds should be aspirated. And p being 2 of them. Are there any others?
So how do you practice them? And then there's, of course, fricatives, which are similar, where you are definitely forcing air through a small space. That kind of stuff. So what I have so in the past, an idea is, think of it at, like, again, pronunciation is physical. Think about the air as you're making the sound. Think about when it stops and when the air is going to start flowing again. And to make an aspirated sound, push it harder, right? So you're making a d. When you start making a d sound, the air stops, d, and then it goes. But you just kind of let it go normally. For an aspiration, force it. Use more air than you need, which will give you an over-the-top aspiration. I'm not going to say it because it'll sound bad on the microphone. But really, really force the air through. Same with fricatives. When you're trying to learn how to say an F sound, really just like hold it and force the air through. T's and P's are a little bit different because it's supposed to be a short aspiration, so it's harder to practice, but you still can. Like really, really practice forcing the air through.
I mean, again, we always say, and Tony's already said it, but pronunciation is physical. And and I feel like aspiration, it is important, but you need to think about it in terms of the physicality. What it means is something to do with the air. But these two examples, t and p, they're physically actually very different. Yes, you're holding air back and then letting it go, but with a p, you're doing it with your lips. P, p. But with a t, you're doing it with your tongue. It's more internal, behind the teeth. T. You can't really see it. You're holding your tongue at the top of your mouth and stopping the air coming out with your tongue. So I think it's more important to think about what you're doing with your mouth than it is about whether it's aspirated or not. I mean, yes, it's really important that it's aspirated, but the difference between those two sounds is what you're doing with your lips and tongue. I think that's the most important thing, the physicality.
I agree.
So yeah, great
good question. And hello, Vitali, welcome.
Hello. Okay, let's see. So another question. We've got a few questions from Jack now.
Or is it all the same question? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Right. What is disclosed in the expression point of view?
So your point of view, also called your perspective, right, is the way you see things, right? Like kind of we describe it as the direction you see things from. There's an old story about I won't tell the whole story, but the short form is they took a bunch of blind men to see an elephant, and if one blind person touches the elephant on the leg, they're gonna be like, oh wow, and they say, oh, it's like a tree. An elephant is like a tree. But if you touch the elephant on the trunk, like, oh, an elephant is like a snake, right? In that case, it's their point of touch. But the idea is, depending on what direction you're coming from and everything that's unique about you and your culture, you're going to see things in a different way. And this can both be literal or point of view. The point of view is very different from the top of a mountain than from the bottom. When you're at the bottom, all you see is the trees, the rocks, whereas at the top of the mountain, you can see so much more. But we also mean it metaphorically. So like Jack is saying, intellectual vision. If you come from a poor background, you're going to see things differently than someone who didn't. There are certain things you're going to not take for granted, or that you're going to think are really amazing, right? And then so everyone has their own point of view. It's important to realize that everyone has a different point of view. It's like with accents. There is no one correct English accent. There is no one correct point of view. A point of view is not something that you just have to recognize it's there and always be thinking about it. It's all relative. There's no one exact correct one.
So then Jack goes on to say, vision here refers to intellectual vision. So
right.
Well,
how you understand things.
Yes. So point of view can be literally referring to vision, the angle at which you're looking at something, but it can be intellectually, the way what your background and experiences may affect the way you interpret something,
or even the way you are right now, right? Like if even something that has just happened to you might change your point of view for a shorter time than like your entire background and culture changes your point of view. But yeah. So Jack says the same, as a comment later on, the same story gets understood in different ways by different individuals because they are bringing to it different points of view. And yes, that's exactly right. Oftentimes we will understand things very, very differently just because our point of view is different.
Yeah. But view there is used metaphorically. Yeah. Great. Okay, let's see. We got any more questions?
I don't think so. Lorena has some of these paired consonants, right?
Yeah.
Although I think you have the order reversed in the second one. So it's P and B, T and D, and K and G, K, G, K, G.
as in the paired consonants.
And b, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but also they're all voiced and aspirated.
Yeah.
Are they?
The voiced ones are aspirated. Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Good.
Well, but the difference between paired consonants is not one's aspirated, the other's not. It's
And the other's
one's
voiced. No. These are the voice or the aspirated consonants, but only the voiced ones are really aspirated, or at least hard aspirated. Like g is not, but k is. Yeah. Right. So the other way around, like the unvoiced ones, right? Did I say voiced? So the unvoiced ones are aspirated, but the voiced ones, b, d, g, are not really aspirated. There's still like you stop the airflow and then start it up again, but you don't force it out. Right?
Yeah. But that's not. It's not to say that voiced consonants are always aspirated.
No, definitely not.
Like z is not aspirated.
In this particular case, these are pairs, but it just so happens that the unvoiced ones are the aspirated consonants. Yeah, and so you've paired the aspirated consonants with their pairs that are voiced but not aspirated. But again, there's not normally paired consonants about whether they're voiced or not whether they're aspirated or not.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, everyone. Now, I wanted to go back to something we touched on earlier, and this is about, because it ties in with our course as well, and this is about auxiliary verbs being really important for tense, but then they also play a huge role in other things like
passive and subjunctive and all the different modals.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So we often, I think a common mistake is that people think the way you make a tense is all about that you change the form of the verb. For example, I walk, present simple. I walked, past simple. Now, the reason in that case, the only thing that's different is the main verb. But that's because it's the simple tense, and simple tense is a little bit strange because the full sentence would be I do walk and I did walk. It's only in the past simple that we can change just change the form of the verb to make it past tense, or to change the tense. Every other tense you've got an auxiliary verb. Like I was walking, I had walked, and so this is why the auxiliary verb is much more important for making tense and other things as well. And this is actually one of our three big ideas in our course for understanding tense. Is it the second idea? I think it's the second.
Auxiliary verbs is the third, but the order isn't like order of importance. They're just order from the most simple to the most far.
That's why I never remember the order. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The order really isn't important. We call them, but it's not really big idea 1, big idea 2, big idea 3. They're just the 3 big ideas. Yeah. So the first big idea is that you've got the 3 sort of types of a sentence: a question, or positive, negative, and a question. And then and depending on, and you use the similar elements: subject, auxiliary verb, and main verb. And you can, by changing the order, you change whether it's positive, negative, or question. Or to make a negative, you also add the word not. But those rules apply very consistently across any verb and any tense. So this is one of the things that is really sort of logical. It really makes sense. It's very simple rules that apply to every sentence. And because people, when it comes to tense, people think, oh, it's so confusing. There's so many exceptions. But this is one thing that we like to highlight that isn't irregular. There are no regular cases.
this really is logical throughout, in every tense. And then the second idea is, what's the second idea?
The second idea is that tense, instead of learning 9 or 7 or 12 tenses, tense is just 2 parts. There's 3 times of action, past, present, and future, and 3 types of action, simple, continuous, and perfect. And together they make the 9 main tenses. And you can actually be both continuous and perfect, which is where we get the 12, right? So rather than understanding, having to learn what do 12 different tenses each one mean and memorizing all of those, all you have to do is understand what the 3 types of action mean and how they interact with the 3 times of action. And so then you don't have to figure out, oh, now I'm doing the past perfect continuous. You don't have to, oh, what do I remember about the past perfect continuous? You just break it down. What do I know about past? What do I know about perfect? What do I know about continuous? That equals what the past perfect continuous is. And I'm not sure why this is not something that is taught as much, but it really, instead of having to memorize 12 different things, you only have to memorize 6, really only like 3 with a couple of variations.
I mean, because past, present, and future is kind of self-explanatory. It's
pretty self-explanatory. The biggest idea, and this is almost like a subset of that big idea, is that the time of action doesn't really mean when the action happened. It means when are you talking about? Yeah. Right. You use past tense to talk about, you're talking about a time in the past, but the action could have happened even further in the past. And in the present, you can use the present perfect to talk about an action that's in the past, but you're talking about the future. The future? No, sorry. What did I say? You're talking about the present perfect. You're talking about the present. Yeah. That's why. That's one of the most confusing things about the present perfect tense is that you're really talking. The action happened in the past, but you're talking about the present and how it affects the exactly. And that demystifies the present perfect, because once you realize, okay, I'm talking about the present. Well, if you're talking about an action that already happened, well, in the present, you're obviously talking about the consequences of that action, the result or the effects or the fact that it's finished, right? But once you realize, oh, hey, I'm talking about the present, well, now the present perfect makes a lot more sense. You use it when you're talking about the present and how it was affected by an action in the past, right? And that just that's a lot simpler than learning a list of reasons to use the present perfect, right?
Yeah, and then the other thing is so really the only thing you need to learn is those. What does simple or what does continuous, perfect, and simple mean? And simple is simple, but it's not simple in the way that people think. Right.
It's only simple because it's not perfect or continuous. So really, you just need to understand what perfect and continuous mean, and then recognize that simple isn't saying either of those two things. Yeah. So I mean, we just reduced 12 tenses. You just need to know 2 things. What does continuous really mean? What does perfect really mean? And then you understand tense.
Yeah, simple as that. So that's our course. Inside English, making tense make sense. Hello to Akash, who's just joined us, who says good evening. But you're a little bit late because we're just about to end. We've been going for now, but luckily you can go back and start at the beginning. And yes, if you do have questions, we'll be here again next week, I think, same time, same place. And if you have any questions during the week, you can go join up to our Discord channel. The link is down in the description. Or just be here next week and ask your question then, and we'll answer it. But if you're worried you might forget, head on over to Discord and ask the question there.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say, Tony?
No, I don't think so.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.